He chose the mansion, the symbol of everything he thought success meant. The first time Elliot Bell saw the estate, he was 17. His grandfather's funeral had just ended. The air outside the old cathedral still smelled of candle wax and wet pavement. Everyone else went home. But Elliot followed the family lawyer down a gravel path, past stone gates, toward the property that, until that day, had only lived in stories. Bellhurst Manor. It wasn't a house, it was a declaration. 12 bedrooms, marble floors hand-cut in Italy, a library built to echo Oxford, a chandelier that had once hung in a Parisian opera house. The garden alone had 2 full-time groundskeepers, and the driveway was long enough to need lamps lining its curve. "This is yours," the lawyer said, holding out a single black key. Elliot didn't cry for his grandfather. He barely knew the man. But as he stepped into the vast silence of the entryway, something inside him whispered, "You made it." That night, he called Leah, his girlfriend since college. "You won't believe this place," he said. "It's like living in history." But she didn't sound impressed. "Does it feel like home?" He paused. "No," he admitted, "but it will." That was the beginning. Over the years, Elliot transformed Bellhurst into a fortress of success. He hosted charity galas, CEOs toasted champagne in his dining room, magazine photographers captured the staircase, the wine cellar, the vintage desk in his study. Leah moved in. They got married under the gazebo by the West Wing. She wore her mother's dress, he wore his grandfather's cufflinks. But something got lost in the echo of grand halls. He no longer knew where she left her shoes. They stopped eating at the same time. He spent more time with the staff than with her. Still, Elliot told himself it was worth it, because when guests arrived and looked around in awe, he felt seen, validated, admired. Every portrait on the wall reminded him, "You belong here now." But the truth was colder. Every night, Elliot walked alone through rooms too big for one voice, and every morning he drank coffee on a balcony she no longer joined him on. Bellhurst promised everything, and slowly it was taking more than it gave. Some houses echo louder when love stops filling them. At first, it was little things. Leah would pause in the middle of a sentence, realizing Elliot wasn't listening. He'd nod at the right moments, but his eyes were scanning emails or floor plans for the next renovation project. She used to leave him handwritten notes on the kitchen counter, quotes from books, memories, silly inside jokes. One morning she stopped. He never noticed. They used to dance. After dinners, she would connect her phone to the speakers in the main hall and play something soft. Nina Simone, Nora Jones. He'd take her hand and they'd glide, barefoot, across polished marble. But now, the music stopped playing. The speakers grew dust. Leah began sleeping in a different room. She said the master suite was too cold. Elliot said nothing, too tired to fight over blankets or feelings. Bellhurst had space for everything, wine tastings, business meetings, art auctions, but it had no room for repair. Leah brought up moving. "We could start somewhere smaller," she suggested. "Maybe something new, something ours." Elliot looked around the room. Every object had a plaque, a date, a history. "Why would we leave all this behind?" he asked. "Because I'm already behind," she whispered. The staff started avoiding conversations. Housekeepers entered quietly, left quicker. Even the chef began leaving dinners covered, untouched. Elliot's parents visited once and asked where Leah was. He didn't know. One evening he found a note. Not like the old ones, no jokes, just ink and honesty. "You fell in love with a house. I fell in love with you. I can't live in third place anymore." There was no anger, no accusations, just a truth too heavy for marble to hold. He rushed to the guest room. It was empty. The closet too. Only her side of the bookshelf remained untouched, filled with poems and photo albums. Elliot sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by silence. And for the first time in months, he noticed something. The chandelier in the hallway flickered when no one walked beneath it. Bellhurst was quiet. Too quiet. Not like peace, like absence. Fame is loud. Regret is quieter, but it lasts longer. The press didn't know Leah had left, at least not yet. Elliot still showed up for interviews and charity galas with a flawless tie and perfect posture. He smiled, gave speeches about legacy and architecture, and nodded when reporters asked about future renovations at Bellhurst. But the lights began to feel hotter. At a benefit dinner, a journalist approached him with a whisper. "Is it true your wife moved out?" He laughed. "Too hard. Too long." "Don't believe everything you read," he said. No one had published it yet. But in this world, secrets aged quickly. 1 week later, a blog posted blurry photos of Leah in a small seaside town, wearing jeans and holding coffee with a friend. No ring, no makeup, no mansion behind her. The headline, "Where's the other half of Bellhurst?" The article went viral. Suddenly, Elliot wasn't just the proud heir. He was the man whose wife left the mansion. They made it a story about betrayal, but not his. They said he loved bricks more than vows, that he gave interviews but not affection, that Bellhurst was beautiful and empty. He stopped reading the news, but he couldn't stop the headlines from reaching the investors. At a foundation board meeting, an older man leaned in and said, "Your house is impressive, Elliot, but your story is turning cautionary." That word stuck. Cautionary. It sounded like a ghost. Back at Bellhurst, Elliot walked through every room. He opened closets, stared at dusty art frames, turned on chandeliers just to hear them hum. And then the storm came. Not metaphor. Real storm. Lightning. Blackout. The backup generator failed for the first time in 20 years. Elliot sat in darkness, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who built legacies with more than just stone. He lit a candle and walked to the gallery. One painting was gone. He didn't remember selling it. But Leah had once said, "I want our love to be something you'd never auction." He hadn't listened. Now even memories were missing from the walls. Some houses echo louder when no one's calling your name. When the lights returned the next morning, the silence stayed. Elliot wandered into the conservatory where Leah used to read. Her chair was still there, but it faced the window now, turned away from the piano they used to play together. The keys were dusty. One was chipped. He pressed it. No sound. In a drawer, he found one of her old notebooks. Inside, a half-written poem. "A house is not a heart. A ceiling is not a sky. You can't rebuild love if you never learned goodbye." She had never shown it to him. He sat there for an hour, rereading the same 4 lines. They felt heavier than the mortgage on Bellhurst. He had once chosen the mansion over her, not in a loud fight, but in the small, repeated silences. The dinners missed, the eye contact avoided, the way he said "we" when he meant "I." At lunch, the estate chef came to ask about staffing cuts. Elliot realized he didn't know the chef's name, or the gardeners, or the woman who had worked the library catalog for 30 years. He walked outside. The lawn was perfect, too perfect. It looked like no one had ever lived there, and maybe no one had. Not really. That night, Leah called. First time in months. Her voice wasn't angry, just quiet. "I saw the paintings gone," she said. He nodded, forgetting she couldn't see. "Do you want it back?" he asked. "I never wanted the painting," she replied. "I wanted to be remembered like it." Click. The call ended. Not violently, just completely. He sat alone again, surrounded by chandeliers and ceilings too high for echo. That night, he didn't light the hallway. He let the dark remind him of everything he couldn't rebuild. Because some lights, when they go out, never come back. Some legacies arrive too late to be shared. The envelope came on a Wednesday. No courier, just a faded stamp, the kind only a grandfather would still use. It was from Elliot's grandfather's lawyer, his original lawyer, not the team Elliot hired after the estate passed to him. He opened it at the kitchen island, next to a glass of untouched wine and a bowl of untouched dinner. Inside, one document, a codicil, a small amendment, dated 1 week before the old man's stroke. The handwriting was shaky, the ink bled at the edges, but the message was clear. "To my grandson Elliot, I leave the mansion under one condition, that he never lets the house cost him more than the people who built it." There was no signature flourish, just the name, Edward Halberd. And beneath it a PS, "If the lights go out, leave. The house is not what you inherit. The name is." Elliot closed the letter and looked around, at the dining room that had never hosted a real dinner, at the ballroom that echoed with no music, at the portrait of him and Leah still on the hallway wall, faces turned slightly apart. He called the lawyer who had sent the letter. "How long have you had this?" he asked. 10 months, came the answer. "Your firm blocked old correspondences. I just assumed you didn't want it." Elliot whispered. "I didn't know I needed it." But he did. He had inherited more than a property. He had inherited blindness, pride, and now, clarity. He made one phone call that night, not to Leah, to a realtor. "I want it off the market," he said. "The mansion?" "No," Elliot said, voice steady. "My name." The next morning he packed a suitcase. Not much, just clothes, some old photographs, the dusty piano sheet from the conservatory, and the original letter. He didn't look back at Belhurst, because finally he understood, a legacy isn't where you live, it's what you leave when you're gone. Some silence says more than applause ever could. Elliot moved into a modest apartment above a bakery in a quiet street. No chandeliers, no gate, no lineage carved into stone. Just warm bread in the mornings and the sound of neighbors talking through thin walls. He didn't tell anyone where he went, not out of shame, but peace. For the first time in years, he didn't owe anyone a version of himself. In the corner of the living room stood the one thing he took from Belhurst, the grand piano. Not the glossy black centerpiece from the ballroom, but the smaller, worn upright from the old music room, the one his mother taught him to play on. He hadn't touched it since the divorce, not since Leah stood behind him during a silent evening and whispered, "You don't even hear what you're playing anymore." Now in this empty room, he played. Slow, imperfect notes. Not for an audience, not for legacy, just for sound, just for presence. The melody stumbled but carried weight. And in that music, Elliot felt the weight of things not said, of apologies unspoken, of birthdays missed, of nights spent in the glow of chandeliers instead of someone's arms. One morning, a knock at the door. He opened it and found Leah holding a box. "I thought you might want this," she said. Inside, a photo album, a cracked teacup, and a single house key. "I don't know why I kept it." Elliot took the box slowly. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said, "but neither did he, and he still left you the house." They didn't hug, they didn't cry. But before she turned away, she looked at the piano and said, "You're finally playing it like it's yours." When she left, Elliot sat back down and played again. And this time, the room didn't feel empty at all. Because some legacies aren't about inheritance. They're about rediscovery. They're about becoming someone you can live with, even if you have to lose everything first. He lost the mansion, the marriage, the name, but finally found himself. Months passed. Elliot no longer looked at clocks like ticking bombs. He woke when the light came through the window, not when meetings demanded his attention. His phone stayed silent. No lawyers, no brokers, no staged apologies from relatives asking for just a small loan. The world had moved on. Belhurst had a new owner. His father's portrait had been taken down. The estate's name was now a brand, plastered over perfume ads and designer menus. But Elliot didn't need the house to remember who he was. One morning, he visited the old cemetery on the hill, not for his father, who had always lived as a stranger, but for his grandfather, the man who once told him, "If you ever forget what matters, listen to music with your eyes closed." He sat beside the grave. No flowers, just honesty. "I thought I had to earn the house," Elliot whispered, "but maybe I only had to earn myself." The wind answered in silence. Later that week, he received a letter. Not a bill, not a demand, a thank you note from a boy who lived in the shelter Elliot had quietly begun donating to under a pseudonym. It read, "They say I might get a piano lesson next week. I've never touched one, but I think it can help me find my voice." Elliot smiled. He walked back home, past the bakery, climbed the stairs, and opened the door to his quiet apartment. The piano waited. And this time, he played something new, not a song from his past, but a melody only he could write. No legacy, no mansion, just a man with calloused fingers and a full heart. Because when the lights go out, some people panic, others finally see clearly. Sometimes the final page doesn't need a signature, it needs courage to close the book. Months after Elliot left the mansion, now living in a modest apartment, playing the piano in the stillness of quiet mornings, he thought the past had been buried, that the family ring, the ghostly ballroom, and the lights that went out were no longer his. But letters don't age in silence, they rot. And some truths only find voice when someone stops waiting for permission. On a cold Wednesday morning, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a sharply dressed man holding a leather case and the tired look of someone who's carried too many secrets. Without ceremony, the man introduced himself as Alistair Westbourne's former attorney, the original drafter of the final will that had mysteriously burned. "Mr. Bell," he said with a heavy tone, "I believe it's time you see what was meant to remain." He handed Elliot a folder. Inside, notarized documents, digital backups, witness signatures. all confirming an earlier version of the inheritance, dated just days before Alistair's death. And it changed everything. This version named not only Elliot, but Leah, his ex-wife, as co-heir. The mansion, the rural estate, the art collection, everything split equally. There was a clause, the lawyer explained. If the heir chose to abandon the marriage, the estate would be divided to protect the partner. But that clause was ignored, then destroyed. The knife of truth cut slow. Elliot sat down stunned. Every page stung like betrayal. The injustice, the manipulation, the value he placed on legacy over love, it was all written in legal ink. You can fight this, the lawyer said. Restore her name, the inheritance, at least the truth. But Elliot didn't look at the documents again. Instead, he took the clause page, walked to the kitchen, and burned it slowly over the sink. Controlled flames, but real. I don't need this anymore, he whispered. The lawyer left the folder behind and walked out. No promises, no glory. Elliot watched the fire consume the past, and in the soft crackle of ash, something else whispered back. Some inheritances don't survive the truth you've already paid. Then he picked up the phone, dialed a number he hadn't called in months. 2 rings. Leah? Silence. I know. He hung up, and for the first time in years, he slept. They say inheritance is what you receive. I say inheritance is what you choose to keep. I lost the mansion, I lost the glitter, the galas, the ghostly applause, I lost the echo of footsteps in hollow halls. But I gained something no marble walls or private chefs could give me. Clarity. There's no legacy worth owning when the price is your soul. I chose silence that heals, not the silence that hides. And if one day someone asks me what's left of the Bellamy name, I'll answer with truth, not titles. Because some inheritances aren't privileges, they're choices.